All right, let's do it.
Okay.
Okay, well, welcome everyone again. And this is the War Industry Resistors Network webinar that you're here for. And this webinar is our fifth one, and it's about the militarization of our borderlands. All of our webinars, as you can imagine from our name, if you don't know who we are about the militarization of our society, and in particular, the war corporations that are making a profit off of the making of arms and all the kind of weapons and tools that they supply to enable wars and to enable militarization. So, so we're very happy to have you here. And in the chat, we'll put a link to our website, the War Industry Resistors Network. There is one already. We'll put it again for people who arrived late. And also, if you want to be part of our mailing list, put your email in there and we'll add you to our mailing list and let you know when we're doing things. I just want to say that we have organization. What the War Industry Resistors Network is a network of grassroots organizations around the country. And actually, we have people in Australia and Canada and the UK as well, all of whom are focused on a local war corporation or affiliated industry in the war complex, military industrial complex, that they are trying to raise attention to and resist. And most recently, from the April 17th to the 24th, we had called for and just finished a week of mobilization of asking people all over to show up somewhere and to raise the banner, the anti-war banner and the anti-war corporation banner, and do a demonstration or some such thing. And we did have over 30 plus organizations around the country do a demonstration. And if you go to our website, you can see what some of those were. So we're coming off of that feeling pretty empowered about having 30 different locations around the country involved. And now we're gonna have a meeting coming up not too far from now in a couple of weeks to determine where we go from here. You know, what our next project or next vision is to continue our work. So I hope you can join us as we continue the work. Just put your email in there and we'll keep you informed and get you connected to us. Okay, so this evening we have three presenters and we're really happy with all three of them agreed to be part of this. I'm going to introduce one at a time, do a little bio that that person sent me and let that person do 15 minutes or so. And then the next and the next, I'll do an intro for each person. And then after that, we'll have some time for Q&A. And if you have questions along the way, you can put them in the chat and we'll hopefully get to all of your questions. We'll see what we have time for. So our first presenter is Joanne Coots. She is an independent cartographer, writer, and activist whose work focuses on the Sonoran Desert. She is a committed volunteer with the Ajo Samaritans and many other humanitarian aid and search and rescue recovery groups working in the borderlands. Her humanitarian aid practice has led her towards learning to honor and center Odom language and ways of navigating and traveling in the desert. Joanne has created many maps of the Sonoran Desert as well. So thank you, Joanne, for coming, and the floor is yours. Go right ahead. Oh, let me say before Joanne starts that Joanne is operating with some limited bandwidth. So if you don't mind while she's presenting to cut your video off, that might keep her tuned into us. So if you'll just turn your video off while she's presenting, that'd be great. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Joanne.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, my name is Jo. I use she, her pronouns, and my favorite desert animal is the cochon, the pack rat. And I'm going to just begin sharing my screen for my presentation. Excellent. Seems to be working. So I want to begin with land acknowledgement. I'm actually currently not in Arizona. I'm currently in Wawiapanong, which we now know as Detroit. But the land that I'm going to be talking about today, the land that I provide humanitarian aid on, is the Hana Atam, Akamal Atam, and Hachid Atam land. And I would invite everyone, before I begin the presentation, to take a moment to think about the violence that has been perpetrated on this land in our name by our forebears and by our current government. So that includes things like land theft, erasure of language, erasure of communities, and militarization that not only physically, but also spiritually scars the land through creation of borders and walls that divide communities, water theft that destroy rivers, natural rock tags, and springs. So just ask everyone to take a moment to think about the violence that's been perpetrated on the land. Thanks, everyone. So when I provide humanitarian aid in the desert, I commit to respecting the land and to acknowledging its livingness. That is, its value as a living thing in and of itself. I agree to treat the Hashan, the swallow, with respect due to Atam ancestors, and the Totoag, the mountains, with the respect due to desert guides. And I agree to leave things that are not for me and to take with me things that are not for the land. So I first came to the borderlands, what we call the borderlands, the so-called borderlands, in 2018 with No More Deaths. Like many other people, I've always been something of an advocate for immigration and for the arts, but my engagement, my activist practice changed in 2017 after the election of Donald Trump. I went to Bulgaria and Greece for the Civil March for Aleppo and volunteered at Lesbos Solidarity Pikpa. And shout out to Cornelia Alfmuth, who I think is on this call, who I met there. It's great to see you here, love. So as I mentioned, in 2018, I came to Ajo, to the so-called US-Mexico border with No More Deaths. I returned back to my job in Washington, DC. And 4 months later, I quit my job and came back to Ajo as a full-time volunteer with the Ajo Samaritans. One of the reasons why I was compelled to come back to the border was that during my time with No More Deaths, in fact, 3 days after I arrived in Ajo, I was with a group of volunteers and we were putting water out in the Growler Valley, a place called the Growler Valley. And we were putting a water line. The idea was to put a gallon of water and a can of beans about 50 feet apart across the entire width of the valley. The valley is about 10 miles wide. It's one of the most deadly areas for people crossing the desert today. And so we were in groups of 3 or 4, and everybody had a section. And my group that I was with, we went out and we put out our first section of the water line, about a quarter-mile worth of water line. And on the way back, we were coming towards a wash, probably about a mile and a half from the Bateswell Road. This is the road right here at the bottom of this map. And we startled a group of vultures who were in a wash. And we sort of approached the place where we'd seen the vultures fly up from, and we discovered there the body of a man who had recently passed in the desert. And the volunteers that I was with, this is my 3rd day in the desert, so the volunteers I was with much more experienced than I am. So I basically sat down in shock. I mean, I've visited many national parks, but I have never, ever come across somebody who has died in a national park in the US until that moment. So I sort of waited while they put out flagging tape, they took photographs, and we spent some time sort of reflecting on what it meant to find someone who had passed in the desert. And then we started back towards the road, and we were going to report the fact that we had found this gentleman to the law enforcement so they could come out and recover his body. And on the way back to the road, we ran into the National Park Police, and they asked us like what we were doing there, and we told them that we had just found this gentleman who had passed in the desert. And they weren't like national parks police, like when you go to like Yellowstone or something and you meet the park rangers and they say, well, have you seen a bear, or what animals have you seen? They weren't like that. They weren't wearing like big brown hats. They were wearing bulletproof vests. They had guns. They had sticks. They looked like they were in the military, not like they worked for the national parks. And so we said to them that we had found this gentleman, and we gave them the coordinates, and we pointed. I mean, we were maybe 500 feet from where we had found him when we met the National Park Police. And then we went back to the road and we picked up the water, and we went back to do our second section of our waterline. As we retraced our set, putting out the waterline to meet with the end of the first waterline that we had put out, we couldn't find the end of the waterline, like it had disappeared. And so we head back to the road again, and we run into the same group of National Parks Police, and we say to them, what are you doing? Are you doing this recovery? And they said, oh no, we had to go and pick up some trash that somebody had left in the desert first. We're sort of like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, someone had left a bunch of trash in the desert, and we had to go and clean that out before we went and did this recovery. So we left them, we argued with them for a while, and then we left them and we walked back to the road. And when we saw their truck, we went out to their truck, and in the truck, we found all of the water that we had put out for the first section of our water line. So these people who supposedly are, working for the National Park Service felt that it was more important to take out life-giving water, to take out what they considered to be trash that we considered to be humanitarian aid supplies, than to recover the body of this gentleman who had passed in the desert. And that experience really sort of, I couldn't, at the time I was, I had been in the desert for 3 days. I couldn't believe what was happening. Eventually, the gentleman's body was recovered, and it took 9 months for him to be identified as Alberto Lopez Tucson through the Tucson Office of the Medical Examiner. This is really my first experience of national parks as border of the U.S.-Mexico, so-called U.S.-Mexico border as a militarized space, something that even I had never experienced living in the U.S. before. So this map I created shows many of the some of the recoveries that I've been a part of in the Growler Valley since the discovery of Alberto Lopez Tucson. This is Alberto Lopez Tucson's view right here, and this map was created from requests of families for landscape photos of what the view might have been of their loved ones when they passed. So I drew this map looking towards La Guja, the mountain which a lot of people walk towards to sort of honor their journeys and to think about and to respect the wishes of their families for these views of what they might have seen as they on their last journeys in the desert. So now I'm back in Ajo, it's 2018, and I'm providing humanitarian aid full time. And so where is Ajo? So this is something that my mom and a variety of other people ask me. Nobody knows what Ajo is. It's a tiny little town on the so-called US-Mexico border. So Ajo, Moivaya, is on Achadatum, Tana Atum, and Akimel Atum land. And so this map shows some of the ways that people moved through the desert prior to the so-called US-Mexico border, prior to militarization of the land. I think it's super important to look at maps like this, as well as looking at maps that have borders. People have said to me, oh, I don't know where this is. I can't orient myself. This map is not in English. It doesn't have the states on it. It doesn't have countries on it. And I think a lot about how people feel disoriented by maps that don't have borders and don't have states on them. And I think about Atum people and how disorienting it must be to constantly be forced to look at maps and to view your land in a way that doesn't have your language on it, that is always in a colonial language, that always includes colonial borders. And I think that this is I know this is a supposed to be a webinar about militarization, but I think this is part of militarization, right? This is erasure of language, and this constantly forcing people to view a land through a colonial lens, to view their lands through the lens of conquest, through the lens of the conquistadors, whether they be Spanish or US American. So this is probably a much more familiar map to everybody. This is just a map that shows the different stages of conquest, the difference and how the US-Mexico border came to be where it is today. After the US-Mexico War in 1848, the so-called border was along the Gila River right here. And then after the Gadsden Purchase in 1853, the land that we now call the Sonoran Desert and the place that we now call Ajo became part of what we now call the United States. So now that we have these maps show like what the militarization of the US-Mexico border now. So on top of the map of the trails, I put the wall, I put the land managers, and you can see how militarization of the so-called US-Mexico border has cut off these trails, blocked people from traveling through these trails. The areas shaded in orange are areas where you need a permit to enter, and the areas shaded in red are areas that are completely inaccessible to the public. And that corresponds to this area here of the Barry M. Goldwater bombing range. So not only do we have immigration enforcement, immigration militarization, and law enforcement along the US-Mexico border, we also have active military. The Air Force over here on the BMGR East, and the Marines over here on the BMGR West. And even north of the Gila River, which has also been erased, we have the Yuma Proving Bound, which is yet more militarization of the US-Mexico border. So how has the US militarized the border? They've evicted and demolished communities, such as the community at Alapia, which we now know as Quito Baquito. And then in 1994, the implementation of the policy of prevention through deterrence, which is a policy that is designed to kill people. The idea of prevention through deterrence was that people would die crossing the desert. And that by other people dying crossing the desert would deter other people from crossing the desert. But if nobody died crossing the desert, prevention through deterrence wouldn't work. And so the idea of prevention through deterrence was that people would die. They've also put up physical barriers, such as the border wall, surveillance, such as the Albert IFTs that are on Tohono O'odham Reservation and other areas along the border. There's mobile surveillance. Just for the past 2 years, there's been a mobile surveillance truck out to the place called Cipriano Well, which is really, really close to Alapia, Quito. There's, as I talked about in the case of Alberto Lopez-Exon, there are armed National Parks Police wearing bulletproof vests and harassing tourists, humanitarian aid workers, as well as people just living their lives in the desert. There are checkpoints, at those checkpoints, your constitutional right to protection from search and seizure does not apply. The Border Patrol at the checkpoints can search your truck if they want to. Another fact about militarization that goes beyond just the actual border is Operation Streamline, which is a policy where to criminalize people who are traveling in the desert today by putting them through trials of about 75 people at one time with minimal representation, and then pushing them into deportation proceedings. So this is just a few photos of what the wall actually looks like and the violence that the war has perpetrated, not just on people, but also on the land. This mountain has been blown up. You can see the what we would call like the inside, you know, the heart of the mountain has been split open. It's really hard. It was really, this was a trip that we took this winter along the Camino del Diablo. It's really hard to see this, to look at it and to be there and to see it. But if we don't go and see it, if we don't acknowledge it, then it feels like just abandoning this land, this living being of the land to militarization, and not bearing witness to the violence that's been perpetrated upon it. So this is just more photos, so you can really see just how violent this wall is. Not just the wall itself, but this sort of 10-lane highway that they have installed next to it. These massive, great big gates. You can see through this gate here the old border fence. The old border fence was bad enough. It's 15 feet high. This is the new border fence. So you can really see how much bigger the new border fence is than the old border fence. And the blood from this mountain coming down into the valley here from the construction of the border wall. This map is a map of people who have died crossing the desert. More than 3,800 people have been recovered from the desert since 2000. Of those people, nearly 1,500 still remain unidentified. And the only county that records the deaths of people or the recovery of people who have died across the desert is Pima County. So when you see over here, this is Yuma County. This is the bombing range area right here. It looks like not that many people have died over here because there's no red dots. But that's just because Yuma County does not record the recoveries of people who have died crossing the desert. It's also partly because humanitarian aid workers and search and rescue groups are not able to get into these areas because, as I mentioned before, this is the bombing range right here. So I think it's super important to be aware that prevention through deterrence, we talk about Title 42 a lot, we talk about remaining in Mexico a lot, but the original policy of prevention through deterrence also needs to be addressed. And we're talking about addressing Title 42, because until we end prevention through deterrence, people will continue to die crossing the desert. So this is a map that I use to orient people to humanitarian aid. This shows Sonoita right here. This is the place where a lot of people start from, going through the Gila Bend. From Sonoita to Gila Bend is an 80-mile journey, going past 2 checkpoints. It's the longest crossing on the US-Mexico border. It's also the cheapest crossing on the US-Mexico border. Unlike many other areas on the border, there's, aside from the town of Ajo and the little town of Y, which is right here, there's no, this is all federal land. So the National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the bombing range, all of this is federal land. So there's no communities, no houses out here. The water sources have been erased. And so it makes the crossing more dangerous and therefore cheaper. So a lot of the people who cross in this area maybe have the least resources and are then forced into carrying marijuana to pay for that crossing. You also have to cross an active bombing range. There's no way to get from Sonoita to Gila Bend without going through the active bombing range. And like I said, almost all of the water sources have been erased through militarization, through capitalism, and through climate change. And I believe that is my last slide. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thanks to Ken for having me, and to Todd and Nelly Joe. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Joanne. That's great. Appreciate you so much. That's so informative, especially for folks who have not been out there to Arizona or who may not know what it looks like or what the face of militarization there looks like. So our next speaker will be Nelly Joe David, and I'm going to read her bio here. And Brian, if you can make her a co-host, I do know that she needs to share her screen, show some slides. So Nelly Joe works to strengthen indigenous rights and autonomy on the imposed US-Mexico borderlines intersecting the Tohono O'odham Nation. Nelly is the co-founder of the O'odham Anti-Border Collective. It's a grassroots group dedicated to maintaining connections despite colonial barriers. She is from Ajo, Arizona, traditionally Hia said O'odham territory, just west of Tohono O'odham Reservation, north of Mexico. Nelly was inspired to raise awareness on border issues upon witnessing the increased militarization of her own community. She obtained her Juris Doctorate with a certificate in Indigenous Law and Policy from Michigan State University in 2014. So welcome, Nelly, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. And I will, let me make sure I can share the screen here. Oh, here we are. And so I am from the area that Joanne was just describing. And, you know, to kind of go off of that, you know, the federal land that she was describing used to be, or still is, unceded Hiachid O'odham territory. So just west of the Tohono O'odham Reservation is the area where I'm from. And what I'm currently writing my dissertation on is how mining and militarization, or how mining plays into the militarization of the area, in that it has allowed my hometown to completely be pretty much controlled by the Department of Homeland Security, the Park Service, and all of these entities who now have jurisdiction of our area. So Ajo, formerly also known as Moikwahia, Soft Wells, it's traditionally Hiachid territory, just north of Sonoita. Ajo used to have various villages all the way south to Sonoita, so it didn't used to be so dangerous. People didn't used to die in that area. Before, when there were O'odham villages there was hospitality, and you know, people didn't die of thirst because we knew where the water was. So Hiachid, just a little semantics here. So we're all O'odham in the area of the Sonoran Desert. Our people are still here, and there's quite a lot of us. So the Hiachid kind of just describes the area. So the Hiachid are more towards the ocean. So Ajo is kind of a little bit north of the Gulf of Mexico. And then Tohono O'odham means desert people. Akima O'odham means river people. And our lands were divided by the border. First, our Akima O'odham relatives were cut in half by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And then later, our Tohono O'odham and Hiachid O'odham were cut by the Treaty of Mesilla with additional land. And then there was a really quick land grab. Lots of settlers came and were interested in the minerals of the area. There, you know, we've all heard of the California Gold Rush. There's also minerals in Ajo, and then also towards, you know, all the way towards Sanovir. And so the Sanovir Reservation was formed in 1874. And then in 1916, along with the time of the Indian Reorganization Act was being thought of, or being established, the Papago Reservation was established by executive order. And a lot of that had to do with minerals. A lot of the reservation history had to do with ranchers who wanted to, you know, exploit these minerals, and there needed to be agreements in order for them to do so. And then the mining, and so the mining was the reason that Hiachid O'odham land didn't get recognized, even though we are still existing as people. And all of that area and surrounding area just kind of got grabbed up by bombing ranges, federal parkland, all of that stuff. And so it was really quickly that Hiachinotam land got taken. And so Ajo was also founded immediately after that Gaston purchase because of that the mineral rights there. And fast forward about 100 years, towards the turn of the century, we have NAFTA and the war on terror, all of these things giving the Department of Homeland Security, or newly formed Department of Homeland Security in the early 2000s, unfettered power over our lands. In 2005, we had the Real ID Act, which gave Trump his powers to waive laws on the border. 2007, we had the Boeing towers, which I'm now learning an entity of Boeing. They're related to Elbit, who now has the current integrated fixed tower contract. So I didn't know there was a relation there until recently. And 2007, 2008 is when we saw the checkpoints. And that's when it really changed for me. I was a big homebody going to Ajo every single weekend. I was a young college student at this point, and I stopped going home because of the harassment. It was just too much to have to speak to an agent every single time I was visiting my parents. And then for them, it was even worse. They couldn't do the things that they normally did without getting harassed. And especially my mother, I didn't explain my mixed background. My father's white and my mother's O'odham. And so my whole entire life, I've seen the differences in treatment between families. And, it's definitely worse if, you're not the right ethnicity, or at least in their eyes. And so my entire lifetime, we've gone through a number of targets because of the xenophobia that's gone along with the militarization here. In 2010, there was a Papers, Please law passed. I was living in Phoenix at the time. And, that really inspired me to go to law school. That's pretty much the year I took off and went to get my legal education and my goal was to stop the Border Patrol housing in Ajo. But unfortunately, I graduated in 2014. And by the time I graduated, their housing was already completed in Ajo. And so I couldn't really, the reasons that I went to law school it's already done. And so immediately I went into, activism and when I came back here. And I was approached by several tribal members who told me that Border Patrol was already going around with these trucks. They had these trucks and towers hooked to the back of the trucks. And they were going around the reservation and they were illegally watching people. And folks were saying, they don't have permission to do this. And we're complaining about it. They're supposed to have agreements, but they're not following them. They're pretty much running all over our rights. And so that's when I got started to become familiarized with the integrated fixed towers, which were being discussed during the Obama administration, long before Trump became president. So it was very much a bipartisan effort. And so we were right away, we were trying to educate folks on the towers. They were planning 15 at the time. They've, I believe, constructed 11 on the reservation land. I believe there's 52. Todd might confirm the actual number in Arizona. So there were the integrated fixed towers, which play into prevention through deterrence, as Joanne was speaking about. Folks will be crossing the border, they're on this difficult journey, see the towers, and they're scaling up a mountain, and that could mean death because, an additional terrain, any type of harder terrain, you got a blister and you're set back. And so even the existence of these towers are contributing towards the high number of migrant deaths in and around our land. And so we're dealing with that. And then we also have been dealing with Donald Trump's border wall, which we recently fought. In 2019 is when, we really thought we won in preventing Trump from building his wall in his area. But all this happened, as you see. A national emergency was declared February 15th. Then in June, we thought we won by the court decision, but then there was a stay and construction began. And so we were dealing with that. And here, I don't know, I have this out of order here, but this is one of the slides about the integrated fixed towers and a picture of the integrated fixed towers here. And this is also a company who's been working with Elbit Systems. And unfortunately, they're working with tribal contractors. And so this is what assimilation, the whole policy of assimilation that they started in the early 1900s has led us to. They've really wanted tribes to become part of the US capitalist system with economic development. And so unfortunately, they've expanded that contracting to militarization. Here we are at Quito Baquito Springs. Quito Baquito Springs was affected by Trump's border wall. It is a sacred place to Hiachit Ottam, to all of us Ottam. It is basically an oasis out in the middle of the desert, you know, a sacred water source where we don't have, you know, much water. And while the border wall construction was going on, they needed quite a bit of water to mix the cement to hold the steel barriers in place. And so what they were doing is they were just pumping tremendous amounts of water from the ground in order to build the wall. And this place was very severely affected. By the time we got there in the summer of July of 2020, the water level was very, very low. And we were very scared that, you know, the animals and everything were in danger. And there's still a lot that is facing danger because of the wall, because of the species not being able to, you know, conduct their migration. Migration is a very natural occurrence, and this wall is a very unnatural thing to happen to all of us. Here is us mourning the saguaro, which are sacred to us, as Trump's construction crews didn't really have any regard for the desert that they were hurting. Here again, our construction crews. Here's the Quito Baquito at the very low water levels that we saw it at. And at this time, when we saw it at that point, we were just completely devastated. It had been a year of construction, and Ottam were really, you know, getting restless. A lot of us went over to help the actions with our Kumeyaay relatives out in California who were resisting the border wall. And so we started to do a little bit of resistance for ourselves. And so what we did after some Ottam first did an action over at Stinger Bridge and Iron, which is a subsidiary of Fisher Industries. One of the, you might have remembered the whole We Build a Wall campaign. Fisher Industries was one of the beneficiaries. And so in order to, you know, stop the harm that was going to us, we had to do something. And so pictured above is Amber Ortega. Her and myself put ourselves in front of the bulldozers. That was September 9th of 2020. We ended up standing off with the wall construction workers for about a good 2 hours. Part of it was filmed, and you can look it up and see some of the action that took place. And then for the past year and even more than that, we were dealing with the court cases. So it was her and myself, and then after this action, there was a series of other actions in which we experienced quite a lot of violence at the hands of Border Patrol, National Park Service, working together to stop land and water protectors from protecting our land. And so the National Park Service actually ended up issuing a closure order, preventing all of us from being there, which forced the water protectors to do their actions more towards the checkpoint, which got 12 people arrested. And we were just inundated with court cases, with everybody's you know, legal problems. And we had our own legal problems. I had my own legal problems. And so it was quite a bit of stress that we had to deal with. The good news is, well, the bad news, I was not able to fight my case because we were heavily monitored and you would say targeted by the system. But Amber Ortega won her case. And so it was really exciting. She had the same attorney as Scott Warren did when he fought his case. And so, yeah, attorney Amy Knight really pulled it in for us and fought a religious freedom argument, which was really, you know, we needed that victory. We needed some kind of victory in the face of all the destruction that we've been facing. So it really gave us some hope. But more so, I think the hope lies within the fact that we actually did resist. You know, the Department of Homeland Security knows who we are, and they know that if they were ever to, you know, try something again, that it's not going to be easy for them, and we're not going to make it easy because it is our land. And so here's a picture of the construction while it was taking place. The green area closer to this in the middle there is Quito Baquito. And unfortunately, all that area is now wall, and it's not the same. And so we're fighting to take the wall down. We're fighting to take the towers down, the light structures, all of it. You know, we want it restored. Borders are very unnatural to the animals, to people, to plant life, all of it. And, you know, this prevention to deterrence policy, which is unnecessarily killing all of these people, is also unnatural. And so, you know, all of us are in this fight to take the wall down and to restore, you know, these lands back into, you know, an indigenous way of life that's not harming everything around it. And so, you know, as indigenous people, we oppose militarization. We oppose a way of life that continually harms the land, the earth, and the atmosphere. And also the way of life that, you know, the assimilating way of life that really draws other indigenous people to adopt these unnatural ways of, you know, war and bombing other countries and all these things that are existing on O'odham land. So a few more pictures of the resistance. To the right, you can see the wall workers had a nice day off that day, where it was another day where that was a wonderful day, actually, a victory, because we were able to resist the construction for an entire day. And the Border Patrol, along with Park Service, made a very concerted effort to try and arrest people. They were very violent that day, but we were able to actually de-arrest several folks. A lot of the folks that were there, the allies, formed what we call a white line. I'm learning about all of these tactics, and it was really cool because, you know, they were able to shield people who were the most vulnerable that were being targeted. And we were able to successfully not only stop the border construction in that day, but all leave unharmed. And so, you know, that was really exciting for us to be able to do that kind of thing in the face of, you know, you got to understand, these are areas where the Department of Homeland Security it's a very heavily militarized area. So the fact that we were able to do this kind of resistance in that area was really cool. And that is, I believe, my presentation for, did I take my 15 minutes? I have lots more to say, but I want to give time for Todd.
Okay, Nelly, thank you. Beautiful, courageous resistance. So good. Let's get on to Todd Miller. Some of you may know his writing. He has a blog called the Border Chronicles, which I highly encourage you to get into. He and Melissa, is it Del Rio? I can't quite remember her last name, Todd. But
Del Bosque.
Thank you. They publish every week. Todd's researched and written about border issues for more than 15 years. Last 8 as an independent journalist and writer. He resides in Tucson, but also has spent many years living and working in Oaxaca, Mexico. Author of 4 books, writes a weekly post, as I said, for the Border Chronicles, And I encourage you to read that and get into it. And he does on the ground reporting, analysis, commentary. And over to you, Todd.
Thank you, Ken. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your organizing this. I really appreciate hearing Nelly, of course, and her talk about the resistance, the courageous resistance that they've been doing. And Joanne, of course, and her cartography. So very, very much appreciated. I think today I'm going to give you just a preview of an article that I have coming out on Thursday on the Border Chronicle. So, and it's on the Border Security Expo. The Border Security Expo is an annual event that happens. I guess this was the 15th annual Border Security Expo that I went to. It happened in San Antonio at the end of March. And the Border Security Expo is a place where you'll get the kind of top officials of the Department of Homeland Security, the top officials from Customs and Border Protection, which is the parent agency of the U.S. Border Patrol. So that Raul Ortiz, who is the chief of the U.S. Border Patrol, was present there. And Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, will go. So you'll have officials in conversation with private industry. And so the private industry, in this case, there were 200 companies that were present. Those 200 companies set up shop in a gigantic convention hall. So basically, the Border Security Expo was divided into two parts. One was a conference where you really got to see the kind of conversations that industry and DHS and CBP and Border Patrol has together. So it's like witnessing with your own eyes the what I would call the border industrial complex. And then on top of that, like the companies, in this case 200 of them, and by the way, this is the most well-attended Border Security Expo. This was the 5th one that I've been to myself. I went to one 10 years before in Phoenix, Arizona. It used to be in Phoenix. I remember that one because they had the no protesting allowed signs that were outside of the convention hall as we were walking in. That was my introductory experience with the Border Security Expo. But this time they didn't have that. But still the same kind of, I guess, conglomeration of companies. So basically 200 companies pile into this convention hall. The companies are all kinds of different sorts of companies, ranging from, your big military companies like General Dynamics and Lockheed Martin to smaller, more startup companies that are looking to get into this border security market. You walk in there and it really, after years of having done this and going to places all over the world, actually, it's like walking into, really, it's like half a science fiction novel. So when you go in there, you just see like robots wandering around on the carpet, high powered cameras. I don't know if people have had heard about the robotic dogs. There's a robotic dogs that the Department of Homeland Security boasted about in early February. They wrote an article announcing that the robotic dogs had been tested and they could be deployed on the US-Mexico border. So the company for those robotic dogs was there. Ghost Robotics is the name. So I went to their booth. At their booth, they had a big picture of the robot dog. They had the slogan, which is robots that feel the world, quote unquote. And they actually had a robot dog. And so there was a vendor and he was looking at his iPad and he was controlling this robot dog that was like walking around. And then he came up to me and it wagged its tail, like he had it wag his tail, which is basically antenna, which really, I mean, when Nelly was just talking about the destruction of the living earth, right? And that's happened with the construction of the border apparatus. One thing that occurred to me was that, oh yeah, it's just really the devastation is on animals has been well documented in the U.S. Mexico borderlands. But here we have companies and this whole other thing going on where new animals, robotic animals, surveillance animals are being constructed to be then what, according to the vendor, they're already deployed on the border. When I asked the Border Patrol chief, he said they weren't deployed on the border. So you can, whatever it is, probably going to be deployed on the border. And the idea is that they're like Border Patrol agents. They could run in packs, right? And do the kind of patrolling. It's like an automated Border Patrol agent, a robotic Border Patrol agent. So that was one thing, that you see in this convention hall. And in a way, it's like a science fiction novel, and it's also like a crystal ball, right? You go in there and you're like, oh, okay, this is what is being imagined for the border. And so there's a robot dogs, there's drones of all different kinds. There's one drone company called Saxon. I was able to talk to the vendors there. And one of the vendors said, well, the drone market has gone way up in the last 4 or 5 years. And I asked him, oh, why is that? And he said, it's like a dog that's eaten blood and it got carnivorous. That was his precise answer. And there's other companies like Dell Computers, or Verizon, the telecom company, and they had a booth there. So I went to Verizon and they had this like mobile command and control unit that said Frontline on it. I'm like, okay, so what do you have to do with the border, Verizon? And we went back and forth, and they kept stressing that they were there to be on the front lines of, if there's a disaster of some sort, or if there's a hurricane. They talked about getting their mobile units over there to provide cell phone for service and that sort of thing. But I just said, what does that, why are you here? What does it have to do with the border? And then finally, one person said, well, we helped Border Patrol, and then paused, with the unaccompanied people. In other words, they helped set up a kind of communication system in very remote detention centers in the borderlands. And that's one thing that I learned that Verizon was doing. Probably there's many more things that the company was doing, but that was one thing that they told me. So that's an example of what you see at the Border Security Expo. There's another company, Anduril. Anduril is a company that everyone should kind of keep in mind, because that seems to be the new up and coming company in the border. They have these what they call autonomous surveillance towers, called the Sentinel towers, that they're deploying. They say there's about 200 of them on the US-Mexico border. And they are autonomous in the sense that they are run off of artificial intelligence. Again, automated border apparatus. They have a drone that accompanies these autonomous towers called the Ghost. So this Ghost, and it goes and does surveillance when the sort of triggers of the tower happen. And so all of this is in the context of much of what Nelly and Joanne were talking about, of just this border apparatus that's grown dramatically over the years, especially since the implementation of the prevention through deterrence strategy in 1994, which both Joanne and Nelly talked about. And to give you an example of, just how vast this is, if you look at the total contracts that CBP and ICE have given out between 2008 and 2020, there are 105,000 contracts to the tune of $55 billion to many, many different companies. That $55 billion that's been given out in private contracts over the last 12 years, that doesn't include actually 2021 and this year, but recently, is more than the combined budgets for border and immigration enforcement from 1975 to 2002. That's 28 years of border and immigration enforcement budgets combined. And the $55 billion is $3 billion more than that. So that gives you a sense of how dramatically these budgets have gone up over the years, how these budgets, then the bigger the budgets, like, for example, in 1994, when prevention through deterrence started, the border and immigration enforcement budget was $1.5 billion. By the end of the Clinton administration in 2000, it went up to about $4.2 billion. By the end of the George W. Bush administration, it went to $15 billion. So the Border Security Expo starts in 2005, right after the creation of DHS. And you see all these contracts starting to get doled out. By the time of the Obama administration, all the budgets go up again to about $17 billion when Donald Trump starts. And no, $20 billion, I should say, when Donald Trump started with a $20 billion CBP and ICE budget, and then Joe Biden started with a $25 billion budget. So all this money, billions and billions of dollars. I think if you go from the time of DHS's creation, there has been over $350 billion just spent just from CBP and ICE. And on top of that, looking at the budget now, so you have the Joe Biden right now has issued, I just checked on this, 10,000 contracts since his inauguration about a year. What has it been, a year and a half ago? A year and 4 months ago. 10,000 contracts worth $8 billion. So basically he's on track to have 24,000 contracts by the end of his first term that will be worth $24 billion. So the Biden administration is on track to be to give out the most contracts ever to private companies. And the budget, they just put out the DHS budget request just last month. And the budget request is $26 billion for Customs and Border Protection and ICE. And that is the largest for those two agencies budget that has ever been requested, more than any budget request from the Trump administration. So all that people should keep in mind, because the private contracts are being doled out. The Biden administration is very much continuing along, in fact, amplifying this. And in the next couple months, as the appropriations process goes into place, and that's basically how the budgets get doled out, right, for DHS, you'll start to see lobbying. And for example, this is the last thing, and I'll wind down and we can get to some questions. Like Anduril, the company I just mentioned, the kind of new up and coming company, the CEO of that company is a guy named Palmer Luckey, and he's a 20-something. He's worth $700 million. And he started Anduril a couple of years ago and started getting these contracts. He got $100 million so far in contracts sold to CBP. So he stands up at the Expo, and he's in flip-flops, cargo shorts, a Hawaiian shirt, and shades, and which is completely different dress than like anyone else. Everyone else is in their like kind of suit jackets, and and as I said, it was well attended. So there's tons of industry, tons of like CBP officials, and Lucky gets in front of everyone, and he was supposed to introduce this panel called the digitization of the border, which is very like telling of what the way the border is going. But he gets up and he starts pitching for more money. It was really interesting phenomenon to watch, because it was like being behind closed doors, like behind what Anduril will undoubtedly do in the next month or two. Like last year, if you look, Anduril spent almost $1 million in lobbying, and much of that during the appropriations, also for the Department of Defense, right, as that budget gets doled out. But a ton of emphasis goes to Homeland Security, getting behind closed doors, talking to the appropriations Congress people and that sort of thing. And so, that's, that then you have the full circle of the kind of industrial complex that we're looking at, how all these parts come together, and how, and one of the explanations of many, I'm sure, that of why these budgets go up and up and up and up and up, and why there's more and more and more and more and more contracts that are given out. I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Okay, so we have some time for questions. And let's see if we can get you all to pose some questions. You could raise your hand. You know, there's a little, the reactions button down there at the bottom of your screen allows you, you can see Jeffrey has his hand up now. We'll just take you in order for a little bit, give ourselves 15 minutes or so. I know Todd needs to leave after 10 or 15 minutes. So
Kids.
yeah, beautiful. So let's have a few and see if we can go for a little bit. So Jeffrey, you're first in the queue. Why don't you unmute yourself and go right ahead?
Two things. This is for all of you. One, what's the more? Tell everyone what the moral of this is. The moral of this is, and two, how do we fix this solution, this problem? You know, if this is a problem, if you know what I mean.
Anybody want to respond to that? If I understand you're correct, I mean, I'll try to paraphrase what you just said, Jeffrey. I think you said, what's the moral of this? Like maybe the bottom line, punchline?
Yes, yes, right. And how do we, and if this is a problem, how do we fix it? How do we fix the
problem? Yeah, okay. Any one
Well,
of you?
I think there's quite a few morals that are at play here, with it's a very far-reaching issue. So, when it comes to, immigration, people dying, especially on the borderlands when it's completely preventable, when it's actually a policy. I think, that's a huge moral reflection, and that goes across the lines of, deaths happening, suffering happening, that's a huge moral crisis here. And then it, crosses, so many cultures and things like that. Our people, O'odham people, we have this moral crisis of not being able to connect with our families on the other side, losing our culture, our spirituality, being attacked, all of these things. And as far as solutions, there's so many things that can be done. It's quite a difficult journey because these people are quite powerful. They're, the politicians that are in power, have super PACs and all of those things that, they're getting money from these industries. And so, there's quite an elaborate scheme to keep these military funders on top and making money. And so I think in terms of trying to figure out a solution is how do we, get them where it hurts, and that's their pockets. I think Palestinians have done a good job of showing us what resistance can be like, in the form of a divesting from businesses. I think there's also other solutions in the form of direct action, as we took as in the border wall situation. And there's many other ways in terms of watching who these funders are, who's elected, who's making money, all of those things, many strategies when it comes to targeting these elected officials who are allowing these policies to continue. And so that would be my answer to that.
Yeah. Todd or Joanne, anything to add?
I think Nelly's answer was great, actually.
Okay, all right, good.
I think
see-
like what Nelly did too, like Nelly and Amber Lee Ortega, standing there in front of the bulldozers. Sometimes that's really a powerful action.
By the way, if you want to see a powerful video, look up the video of Nelly and Amber doing their action. They're sitting in the bucket of a front end loader. It's quite courageous, really, very moving. So I see Sonny Robinson next with the hand up.
Thank you. And I thank you all for conveying to us all the details of the horrors of what's happening on the US-Mexican border. But Todd, I have a question for you. I wonder if you would take just a few minutes and talk about the US's role in expanding borders further south than the Mexican border and the training of other border patrols in other countries, as well as what we've been doing in the Middle East and Europe, because I think it's important for people to understand that also. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Sonny. I appreciate that. Yeah, I would argue that's a huge part of the border strategy is this, what I guess I call the externalization of the border, or the extension. There's many ways. If US officials call it many things, they're very upfront about it. The extension of the border, the idea of pushing the border out. And you can go to just about, so I actually wrote a book looking at this, and it's called Empire of Borders, and I knew that this was happening, but when I started researching and figuring out how extensive this was, I was floored. Like the United States has enacted border programs in over 100 countries around the world. And what happens is that assessment teams from CBP will go to different borders. They'll do these assessments. Like they went to the Dominican Republic in 2006. They did an assessment there. They said, oh, your border's porous. You should form a border patrol. So 2007, Dominican Republic, presidential decree, we're going to form a border patrol. And this border patrol then the US Border Patrol goes there. It trains the Dominican Border Patrol called CESFRONT, still exists, and train them, give them resources, transfer all kinds of things, including weapons. And the next thing you know, they're stationed on the border with Haiti. And so I was able to go there and see it firsthand. It was almost like a miniature US-Mexico border, what you might see in Nogales, right? With the kind of, they put up protest barricades and the kind of like a border wall. And the Dominican Border Patrol are sitting their X's, kind of like the Border Patrol does. You know, they'll sit every quarter mile or so, just watching the wall, and just the prevention through deterrence strategy where people can't cross, but have to circumvent those areas. And so that's just one example of the kind of what you're seeing everywhere, really literally everywhere. And the Mexico-Guatemala border is a huge one. I would argue that's a really important place to look when you're looking at US border policy and the kind of transfers, like including Black Hawk helicopters, especially when you're looking at, you know, the military industry and what's going on. Biometric kiosks. So basically, if somebody's arrested by Mexican immigration and they put their biometric data through Mexican immigration, all of a sudden it's like connected with CBP. So the kind of, you know, that kind of stuff is being crossing border. Well, people can't cross borders, like these databases and the huge ever increasing DHS databases are getting bigger and bigger. And you can go around the world to, you know, it's not limited to the Western Hemisphere. I was in the Philippines and the Jordanian Syrian border, and of course the Kenya Tanzania border, and of course Israel Palestine. And you can see like just the footprints of this in just those places. I could have went to 7 different other places and seen it. But there's this kind of extension of the border apparatus, and it kind of goes, well, I could go on and on about it, but you get the picture. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I see one more hand, and that might be our last question anyway. It's 9:15. Why don't we have that one last question? Kathy Marcia, go right ahead.
Hello. I guess my question is, sometimes I just feel helpless. So I just wonder what we can do to help in this crisis. Like, as you said before, like in places like Afghanistan, where like people would say like, they like rainy days, cloudy days because the drones won't strike, and America's like war crimes in other countries where we would bomb hospitals and all that stuff. I just feel like it's going to be a repeat in our own with our own borders, just seeing the lethality that we're going to just to keep people out.
Would either of, or Joanne, I suppose you're still here too. Would any of the three of you like to respond to that? Okay. I think we may all share your feeling, Kathy. It's not a, it's hard to have hope in this time, but yeah, part of what we're doing is trying to connect to each other. I'll give you an answer of my own. Part of what we're doing locally here, I live in Asheville, North Carolina, is you do what you can. You know, you show up for places, you keep together, you keep your hope up, you don't stop. You know, we're up against unbelievable odds with the military industrial complex, but you know, what's the alternative to keeping on? It's to get rolled over, right? Which I don't know. The only thing I know to do is to stay active and to connect to other people. And so that kind of brings me to a punchline, which is this is what we're doing with our War Industry Resistors Network. Is we have this network that is hosting this webinar. And as I said at the beginning of this webinar, there are over 30 locations around the country who did actions against the military industrial complex just within the past week and a half. So there are many of us, and on our mailing list, we have some almost 300 people on our mailing list. And we do have a website. I just want to post there, it's in the chat. I want to encourage everyone here, if you're not already sort of on our mailing list, you can add yourself here with your email. I'll put you on our mailing list. You can go to our website and you can join there on our mailing list. We're going to keep on, you know, we're going to stay connected. We're going to do more webinars. We're going to show up in public. We're going to talk to each other about what we're doing locally. So I encourage you to stick with us here. And I want to thank our presenters tonight. And I, you know, this was, you know, just a heartfelt issue to deal with. Todd and Nelly and Joanne, thank you so much for being part of this. And if you're not, if you have not been to the Borderland, or if you have not read or watched or studied any of what's going on, you've gotten a good sense of what it is now. And I want to encourage you to stay connected to that issue as well, because I mean, as everyone sort of painted the picture, it's not getting any better. I do want to, I guess I want to plug one organization down there that I'm in communication with, and it's one that Todd, actually, you may have started. I think you may have, is the Migrant Trail Walk. There are a group of people there who every year get together, used to be in person, and walk the trail in Arizona in solidarity with migrants. And it's not the hardship that the migrants suffer, but it is a walk in the desert for over a week. And it's a feel for what that environment is like. And it's an educational experience as well. Over the past couple of years, it's been virtual. There's an online connection you can make. You can do the walk locally. I do it here in North Carolina. And then you can connect to people who are talking about what's going on the border. And that's coming up in a month or so. So that's something else you could connect to if you want to stay connected to what's going on at the border, the Migrant Trail Walk. With that, any of you, any of the Todd, Nelly, or Joanne have a last word you'd like to say to the group before we call it quits this evening? Maybe not. Okay, well,
just thank you. Thanks. Appreciate, you know, this opportunity to talk about these issues. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And back at you. Thank you.
I echo that. Thank you for having me, and also just thanks for listening. And I do encourage you to take action. Hold your local, elected officials accountable, and be as loud as you can on these issues, and don't stop, talking about it.
Very good. Joanne, are you still there?
I think so. Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for thank you, Nelly Joe and Todd. And yeah, keep doing it.
Yeah, that's a good motto. Let's keep doing it. All right, everyone. Thank you for being here. Have a good evening. Let's stay together.